Pleasure to be able to finish off today with Mary Jane. Mary Jane is a senior lecturer in childhood and youth studies at the Open University in the UK. She has an extensive background in both education and cultural studies. Her research interests include gender and sexuality, narrative and identity, and popular culture. She's published widely on these themes. She's currently working on an ESRC-funded project entitled The Making of Modern Motherhood, Memories, Identities, and Practices. Working with Rachel Thompson, Lucy Hatfield, and Sue Sharp, this study explores the experiences of first-time mothers in the UK and the ways in which motherhood may be viewed as a site of new social divisions between women. Mary Jane is the author of Gender, Sexuality, and Schooling, and with Anoop Nayak, co-author of Gender, Youth, Culture, Young Masculinities and Feminities, just recently published. We were very lucky to be able to have Mary Jane here as well as Anoop, and so I want to sort of remind everybody about this long distance in the journey and for being patient and waiting. We made decisions about putting Anoop and Mary Jane at the beginning and the end because it was sort of, opening and finale. But I know it's been a long day, but I really appreciate you staying for this. Thank you. Hey, Mary Jane.
Thanks, Jo, for such a warm welcome, and thanks for the invite. It's great to be here. A loosely worked consensus of late modernity presents this very curiously dichotomous view of gender relations in the West. While young men are commonly viewed as through the lens of crisis, young women have emerged as the ideal neoliberal subjects, and it's some of that I want to focus on today. Young men are often represented as the recently dispossessed, these pale shadows haunting a deindustrialised landscapes, while young women appear to take centre stage in the reconfiguration of labour patterns, consumption practices and gender roles. It could be argued that late modernity unshackles women from the patriarchal past. In post-industrial times, the so-called feminisation of labour holds young women in high esteem as flexible, presentable and capable workers. No longer subservient to the male breadwinner, the new feminine subject is economically independent, liberated from the confines of the domestic sphere, and with the help of new reproductive technologies, can actively realise the possibility of having it all and doing it all. The fuchsia-pink hue of late modernity can be seen as part of the prevailing zeitgeist, giving young women licence to exercise agency as assertive and out-there individuals, in step with new times. Young women in the contemporary period appear, and their visibility is part of their unassailable presence in the new girl order. In this paper, I want to explore these changing modes of femininity in post-industrial times, and I want to do this in two ways. Firstly, by looking historically at the ways in which young women have featured in research-based accounts from the 1960s to the 1970s, and largely in feminist sociological accounts. And secondly, by looking empirically at the experiences of intergenerational chains of women over the same period. Now, the paper draws on two studies that I've been involved in. The first that Joanne outlined for you, the Making of Modern Motherhood, the current research project that I'm involved in the UK. And the second, the book that's Anoop and I have written. So I'm drawing on both of these things and trying to bring them together, so that I'll bring together a case study from the Motherhood Project slightly later. Now, looking at representations of femininity in late modernity, you can see there's quite a decisive discursive shift with the portrayal of young women as they were portrayed in representations in the industrial post-war period. The visibility of girls in the contemporary period exists in marked contrast to the accounts of youthful femininities in the 1960s and the 1970s. Though in this period, young women were represented as largely absent or marginal. Feminist scholarship of this period was concerned with the subordinate status of young women. This was, of course, the era of some landmark studies of youth culture, Willis's Enduring Ethnography, Learning to Labour, and then the second oh, it's not there. Oh, there it is, yeah. Resistance through Rituals, the Hall and Jefferson collection, that came from the Birmingham School, documented the spectacularly expressive exploits of young men. Anyone with a passing interest in youth research at the time could be forgiven for thinking that youth cultures were largely populated by white boys. Feminist scholars responded by asking, well, do girls have a presence in the youth scene, and if so, why are they so largely absent from so many studies? McRobbie and Garber's consideration of the position of girls in relation to youth cultures provided a valuable insight into young people's cultural worlds from a gendered perspective. First of all, they drew attention to the ways in which girls have been overlooked or misrepresented in studies of youth culture. They argue that gender is like social class, a structural inequality that materially affects the life chances and experiences of individuals. And it's from this perspective that they discuss the position of girls in youth subcultural settings. So a starting point for McRobbie and Garber is the social space that girls occupy in society generally. They speculate that the relative absence of girls in subcultures may hinge around issues of gender and space, with girls being more centrally involved in the private domestic sphere of the home and the family, rather than the public sphere of the world of the street, where most of the subcultural activities seem to occur. Looking at girls in youth cultures, therefore, shifts the focus from oppositional forms to a consideration of modes of conformity. There are, of course, dangers in hanging around on the streets. Beyond the obvious danger of physical assault, girls' presence on the street could be associated with sexual promiscuity and carried the ensuing risk of a damaged reputation. McRobbie and Garber discuss the significance of mass culture in the lives of young people, and particularly the ways in which marketing and consumption are gendered. For girls, new patterns of teenage consumption engage them in home-based activities, experimenting in changes of clothes, hairstyle and makeup, often in the confined space of the bedroom. Many studies of the period point to the ways in which young women are frequently defined in terms of their sexuality. Their physical attractiveness, sexual availability and reproductive capacities become tropes for the general appraisal of girls as individuals and as a social group. McRobbie and Garber conclude that where girls do appear in youth cultures, it's usually as appendages to men, adding that it's important to look at the ways in which young women interact among themselves to form distinctive leisure cultures of their own. Within Western societies, a wide range of feminist researchers over many decades remind us of girls' sociability. Studies of girls indicate that they have an immense capacity for effective filiations, manifesting friendships as spending time with each other, talking to each other, supporting one another. The other side of female friendship, insightfully documented by Valerie Hay, focuses on the intergender conflict between girls and the ensuing practices of inclusion and exclusion that mark female friendships. In a study of young women's participation in youth clubs in the 1970s, McRobbie offered us particular reading of the exclusivity of girls' friendship groups. She suggested that working-class girls who attended the youth club formed a clique that was zealously guarded and difficult to access. McRobbie described them as huddled together in the margins of the youth club, talking, smoking and reading magazines, while boys played tabletop games in the central space. McRobbie's analysis of emergent femininity in this setting points to the importance of female friendship groups as a site of support and solidarity in young women's lives, acting as a kind of buffer zone in the face of demands placed upon them by a sexist and a patriarchal culture. McRobbie argues that through shared enjoyment of popular culture and the practice of female friendship, young women prepare for their future roles in the domestic sphere as wives and mothers. From this perspective, young women's friendship networks perform an important preparatory function in enabling young working class girls to cope with the exigencies of patriarchal power and subordination. McRobbie used the concept of bedroom cultures very productively, and in fact that's been taken up by a whole number of feminist scholars as a way of addressing the gendering of space and the attending divisions that existed between what was seen as the public and the private sphere. The cultural experiences of young women and their location within the home rather than the street, a space where young men congregated and had fun, epitomised women's marginalisation. For McRobbie, young women were more likely to get together in each other's bedrooms, where they could enjoy a range of self-consciously girly activities, such as experimenting with clothes, hair and makeup, talking about boys, playing popular music. Indeed, the image of the teenage girl standing in front of the bedroom mirror singing alongside a contemporary hit while using a hairbrush as a microphone is one that's been much parodied in adverts and comedy routines. Most contemporary studies of teenage girls illustrate the many points of continuity for young women today. Bedrooms still provide a space for girls to hang out in, often meeting there to drink and get ready for a night out. The bedroom's also a biographical space in which young women create an emotional tone to define their mood and present preoccupations. The personalised space of the bedroom and the use of music are used by young women to express a range of feminine identities. For young women in the contemporary period, the bedroom remains a personalised space that, with access to multimedia, also serves as a global and techno-cultural space. Despite some changes to accommodate technological advances, contemporary studies seem to support McRobbie's original notion that the bedroom exists as a site of gendered production, representing an attempt to create privacy and exclusivity within the home. Now, moving on from the 1960s and 1970s, McRobbie turns her attention to changing modes of femininity and particularly looks at rave study as an example of how gender relations have changed since the 1970s. In keeping with many other feminist scholars, McRobbie indicates, and here I'm quoting her here, there is now a greater degree of fluidity about what femininity means and how exactly it is anchored in social reality. She uses the example of rave culture to illustrate some of the differences in what she terms changing modes of femininity. Here McRobbie focuses upon the presence of girls in the rave scene that flourished in the UK and mainland Europe in the mid-1980s and early 1990s. As a point of contrast to the economic boom of this period and the corporate boast of Thatcherism, rave, at least in its initial stages, eschewed commercial culture and capitalist ethics in ways that Willis would term symbolic creativity. Rave parties were organised by young people themselves and commonly held in disused buildings in out-of-town locations. New technology was used to inform ravers of the street location and also as a strategy for deflecting police involvement and dispersal. There are striking differences between girls' participation in rave culture and McRobbie's description of young women in the Birmingham Youth Club of the 1970s. The girls in that earlier study existed on the fringes of a male-dominated space and did not attempt to play a part in the activities on offer in the youth club. They did their own thing in the margins. By contrast, girls at raves appear to have moved from the margins to the centre. Their participation in the party is that of a full-on reveller, just like their male counterparts. There's not a separate role designated to boys or girls. Rather, there appears to be a common entitlement to the pursuit of pleasure and the pursuit of excitement. McRobbie suggests that this gives young women status and an increased sense of confidence. Within the context of the rave, young women can engage in free and uninhibited expressions of pleasure. McRobbie suggests that the point of tension for girls exists around sexuality. In the era of HIV and AIDS, young women may dress in sexually provocative ways, while simultaneously regulating their sexual behaviour out of concern for health and the changing sexual climate, rather than externally imposed notions of reputation as in the past. Now, moving on to, if we follow on then from the 60s and the 70s and to the present period, to the period that we could call post-feminism and active girlhood, we could ask ourselves, how do girls feature in the changing landscape of late modernity? How has the experience of being a girl changed since the 1960s and the 1970s? Contemporary research on girlhood indicates that there are different ways of being a girl, and that femininity is no longer so rigidly defined or hinged to the domestic. The embracing of pleasure by young women in the 1990s through rave, club culture, television, magazine readership, fashion and beauty has been observed by feminist scholars as the emergence of new forms of femininity marked by moments of celebration, freedom and fun. Terms such as post-feminism, third-wave feminism and new femininities have been deployed to characterise the changes in young women's experiences and their engagement with the social world. The terms themselves are open to contestation in different contexts, signalling both an anti-feminist backlash and new ways of understanding feminism in contemporary times. At its most generative, the post of post-feminism signifies a way of thinking and acting beyond the rubric of feminism and may imply some critique of former orthodoxies. Although, as with other terms such as post-colonialism or post-modernism, the new movement grows out of the past and cannot fully escape the shadow of the earlier period. In this, sorry, I'll just put down.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
In this respect, gender in late modernity is characterised by a blurring of boundaries between the feminine and the feminist. Young women's presence in the nighttime economy is equally as visible as young men's. The girls' night out, birthday celebrations, hen parties have become a high-profile feature of city life and the club scene. This contemporary moment appears to further enhance the emergence of new feminities in its appeal to individualised subjects as agentic controllers of their own destiny. This poses complex issues for sexual politics when girls and young women come to regard the right to pole dance, sport Playboy bunny logos, or have drunken one-night stands as an expression of autonomous girlhood. Active girlhood extends beyond the sphere of leisure, sex and sociability. The processes of globalisation have increasingly relied upon the flexible labour of young women, shaped by the contours of a girl's own success story narrative in the educational sphere. Young women appear as the well-groomed, well-governed subjects at the heart of neoliberal reform. The education of girls and their increased visibility in the social domain coincides with the decline of radical sexual politics in the West, and particularly young women's rejection of feminism as a political project. There are, of course, many ways of reading these changes. A well-rehearsed view, sometimes posited by young women themselves, suggests that feminism has eaten itself. Young women have found newfound freedoms as the inheritors of a feminist movement that has successfully made itself redundant. While not necessarily acknowledging the impact of second-wave feminism, young women report feeling estranged from publicly available versions of feminist politics. The anti-male sentiment, the language of oppression, feelings of anger and marginality, missed opportunity, rarely resonate with their lives or experiences. The legacy of feminism for many young women exists in the mythic and less than glamorous figure of the angry feminist, whose militancy is to be both feared and reviled. An alternative way of reading the individualism of contemporary feminism is to place it within the context of an intergenerational dialogue that young women may be having with their mothers and grandmothers. Baron Nielsen and Rudberg's study of intergenerational chains of women in Norway suggests that the individualism of young women in the present period can be seen as both a response to and a conversation with the battle of the sexist style feminism of their mother's generation. Viewed in intergenerational terms, young women may be exploring points of continuity with previous generations in ways that creatively rework feminism rather than actually reject it. Most recently, Robbie's revisited the idea of new feminine subjects, and she's argued that maybe, she's arguing that consumer culture seems to be playing this especially pernicious role in young women's lives in the present period. So she's, in a cautionary discussion of feminist scholarship and cultural forms, She suggests that feminists may have over-celebrated the pleasures of consumption and underestimated the appetite's market for innovation. In an attempt to celebrate young women's engagements with consumer culture and as agentic and pleasure-seeking, feminist scholars may have overlooked the very tensions and pain of doing girl. Furthermore, Robbie asserts that the emergent codes of sexual freedom and hedonism associated with new femininities should be understood as new technologies of the self rather than celebratory expressions of changing female subjectivity. The renewed emphasis upon the regulatory world of femininity and gender forms of oppression conjures up once again the image of young women in that Birmingham Youth Club in the 1970s, sitting on the margins while young men occupy the main space. These young women passively awaiting their place in the patriarchal order, the oppressive demands of their overdetermined futures mitigated only by the solace and support found in female friendships. More recently, McRobbie suggests that the fashion and beauty industry in particular punish young women through a self-imposed drive for complete perfection. While the new social contract of late modernity offers young women political subjectivity in exchange for the evolving capacity to work, consume and be financially and sexually independent, McRobbie indicates that there is a new sexual contract taking shape in which women conform to the regulatory powers of the fashion and beauty industry, while simultaneously renouncing any critique of patriarchy. Has the experience of being a girl seemingly changed while the regulation of femininity takes on newly pernicious guises, or has feminist scholarship come full circle? The conceptualisation of young women as neoliberal subjects, caught in the double bind of consumer culture and late modern governmentality, may bespeak some of the investments feminist researchers make in girl subordinate status, while articulating some key features of the new girl order. In mapping out the terrain of new femininities, commentaries may have a tendency to emphasise the fissures with the past at the expense of the continuities. The seemingly different new girl order may present a reshaping of normative femininities that provide many points of connection with the past and continue to be subject to regulatory forms. The proliferation of femininities and the extension of girlhood can be read as further manifestations of contradictory feminine conditions that engages young women in ever more artful ways of managing the inconsistencies in identifying as young and female. Now, in the following part of the paper, I want to look at some, if I can get there. Joe, once you've found
Sorry, it's me.
You're back?
Good, you did page up.
Sorry?
Page up.
Yeah, we can have lost it
There.
now. Is that where you want to be?
Oh, a bit before that. That's it, yeah.
Good.
So in this part of the paper, I just want to quickly take you through this case study. As a kind of parallel to the feminist account.
Just fill her up, you know. Too bad it isn't the good stuff.
So I'm going to be focusing on three generations of women in the same family. And in the interest of brevity, rather than giving you lots of quotations from the interview data, I've summarised the main points of their biography. So I hope to take you through that to illustrate how these empirical accounts sit very uncomfortably with that account of the emergence of new femininities that we've heard from feminist scholars to date. First of all, beginning with Nancy, who is grandmother of Gillian and mother of Gillian and grandmother of Kim. Nancy grew up in Edinburgh and in an aspiring working class family. Her father was a skilled labourer in the building trade. Her mother was a full-time mum. She describes her parents as being very strict. Mum was a good homemaker. She commanded respect. She used the wooden spoon on children who misbehaved. When Nancy is 17, her father's offered a job at the company's branch in Zimbabwe. Nancy had been accepted onto a nurse training course in Edinburgh but gave it up to stay with her family. In those days, you did what your parents wanted, she said. In Zimbabwe, she describes this affluent existence. They had a big house, lots of land, servants, lots of money. They mixed with other expatriates and they went out with people from their own community. She met her husband in her late teens and had her first child aged 19. And then she has 3 more children in quick succession. The marriage breaks down when Gillian is 5, and the youngest child is just a few months old. Her husband bans her from seeing the children. She moves away, remarries, divorces due to her second husband's drink problem, then moves back to Scotland 5 years later, where she works as a traffic warden for about 27 years. She doesn't remarry, and she loses contact with her children, and she's not reunited with Gillian until Gillian is 27, a fully fledged adult. So, born in the immediate post-war period, before the advent of second-wave feminism, Nancy conjures up a girlhood where family forms and gender roles were clearly defined and well established. Father as breadwinner and mother as homemaker provided the template for family life in which children knew their place and were expected to adhere to the rules of the household. Doing what your parents wanted you to do is a motif that haunts Nancy's account, indicating that she had little scope for self-expression or the exercise of agency. Although she has a pathway to adulthood through nurse training, Nancy gives this up to migrate to Zimbabwe with her family. She doesn't recall feeling aggrieved or rebellious about this. Rather, Nancy rode the wave of her family's social mobility during this period, enjoying the comfort and affluence of expatriate life. As a young adult, however, she's not able to reproduce the domestic arrangements her parents modelled so expertly. Marrying a man who is, by her account, difficult and controlling. The marriage breaks down when her 4 children are still very young. Somewhat unusually, the children stay with their father, while Nancy is banned from the house by her ex-husband, who also prohibits her from seeing her children. Nancy's second marriage lasts 4 years, then she returns to Scotland and doesn't see her children again until they're adults. Nancy's troubled relationship in adulthood produces a family narrative imbued with the trauma and fissures of mother-child relationships, fissured mother-child relationships. She's been unable to establish a relationship with her sons, and although she sees her daughters, feels unable to make up for lost time. They have to start again, renewing and rebuilding in the present. Moving on to Gillian. Gillian is daughter of Nancy and mother of Kim. And summarising her biography, she's born and brought up in Zimbabwe by her father and stepmother once her mother leaves. She goes to boarding school, that the family have money and considerable amounts of social capital in that environment. Her stepmother tells the children that their mother has gone away. Gillian has a rebellion in her late teens and becomes pregnant aged 20. Her father wants her to have the baby adopted, but she insists on keeping it, despite feelings of shame and the breakdown of the relationship with the baby's father. She becomes estranged from her father and stepmother and also the father of the baby. So she goes it alone. She works as an insurance company while a single parent, meets her husband and has 2 more children, Kim being the elder of the 2. Her husband dies of an AIDS-related illness after a troubled relationship, during which she has many affairs and a mental illness. The company Gillian works for then become embroiled in the political conflict, and Gillian is concerned for the safety of her family. A family friend, someone in her local community, emigrates to England, and she joins them later to escape the trouble. They later marry, and they have another, and then Gillian has another child. She's reunited with her mother in her late 20s. Her mother attends the birth of her youngest child. And just in terms of, I wanted to summarise health as an indicator of well-being. And Nancy reports no serious health concerns, whereas Gillian, her health profile is very troubled. During her late teens, she suffers anorexia in her late teens and early 20s. She's now clinically obese and has mobility problems, respiratory problems, and high blood pressure. So born and brought up, Gillian could be one of the Jackie generation. She's born and brought up during the flowering of second wave feminism. She could have been one of McRobbie's Jackie generation, in fact, preparing for life as a wife and a mother through popular culture while a teenager, before absorbing the zeitgeist of feminist change and the possibility as a young woman. Her biography, at least, suggests that she may have been touched by the spirit of the feminist movement, if not directly involved in it. Unlike her mother, Gillian is not prepared to obey her parents and accommodate to the expectations of her. Refuting the values of her parents' generation, Gillian enacts a form of rebellion that entails a swift transition to adulthood, becoming pregnant, leaving home, getting a job, and living independently as a single mother, all by the age of 20. Her belief in her own autonomy and determination to do what she wants rather than what her father wants comes at a price, creating yet another rift in parent-child relations, and that double-edged bind and pleasure of being economically self-sufficient, yet without family support. Drawing strength from her maternal grandmother rather than her mother, Gillian invests in a matriarchal identity as a strong woman, built to survive and determined to protect herself and her children from the vagaries of troublesome men and hard times. In what can be seen as a recuperation of earlier family practices, Gillian models her parenting style on her grandmother, adopting a strict but caring approach, assigning children jobs around the house and punishing misdemeanours with a wooden spoon. But unlike her grandmother, Gillian has always worked outside the home, climbing up the career ladder from secretary and clerical assistant to company buyer. In this respect, Gillian becomes the main parental figure, maintaining the family's socio-economic status by taking up both male and female subject positions in the household. Then finally, we have Kim. Kim, daughter of Gillian and granddaughter of Nancy. Born and brought up in Zimbabwe until the age of 10, her older stepbrother, younger sister, she's got an older stepbrother, younger sister and younger stepbrother. Her father dies when she's 8, and although she's already estranged from the family, her mother remarries. They all move to England. Mum has another child. Kim has trouble adjusting to life in the UK. She's consistently bullied at school. She leaves 2 schools due to bullying, and then joins a homeschooling programme aged 15, having dropped out of formal schooling. During this time, the nephew of the stepfather comes to stay in the house. He's looking for work. He's come from South Africa, is looking for work in the UK, and during this time he strikes up a relationship with Kim, and Kim becomes pregnant. The mother claims that this young man bullied Kim and coerced her into having sex, but Kim has consistently refused to talk about it. She gives up formal schooling and loses contact with the father of the baby. She has the baby aged 16, continues living at home, completes a parenting course for young mothers while pregnant, and begins access to education. Begins an access to education course postnatally. The coming of age in the post-feminist period, Kim has grown up with a taken for granted notion of gender identity. Being a girl who's not experienced a barrier to education or aspiration. At school in Zimbabwe, she works hard, plays football and cricket, and does exactly what she wants to do. Academically successful, she has plans to become a lawyer, and declares to her family that she will never have children. The move from Zimbabwe to the UK is traumatic for Kim. Her identity as a high-achieving, can-do girl makes her unpopular with her peers in her new social context. She's bullied at school and needs formal education. While on a homeschooling programme, Kim's bedroom becomes her personal space, her classroom, and the site of her sexual initiation with her stepfather's nephew, an event that she subsequently treats as taboo. Her family and friends are shocked by her pregnancy. She literally didn't seem the type. As a single teenage mother, Kim does not experience the shame that was visited on her mother. Her family do not judge her, rather they support her decision to have the baby and continue to play a key role in helping her to cope with the demands of young motherhood. Kim is contradictory positioned within the family as a child with a child. She's reliant upon her mother and stepfather for financial support and is very unlikely to achieve independence in the near future. Now, I'll just try and sum up the concluding points. But the main point I wanted to say is that when you look intergenerationally, youth looks very different. It's like if you look at youth through subcultural theory, youth seems very formative and very important and a really exciting and eventful experience that carries you through into adulthood. If you look intergenerationally, youth may become this very contracted time if you look across the life cycle. It's a very contracted space, and it's also reflected with family dynamics in a way that subcultural theory doesn't indicate that youth is. So in looking intergenerationally, those family dynamics come into play, and you begin to see how this intergenerational chain of women, they're talking to each other through the generations, and there is intergenerational transmission of various sorts going on. So the idea of them being part of a generational cohort in the Mannheim sense seems to break down because that family structure seems far more salient and far more important to their social experiences. So that was a kind of, I was trying to get there, but that was a somewhat contracted way of
You got there. Thank you very much, Mary Jane.